Fairly often in a project tender, you will find that the first revision of the project schedule does not meet the client's requirements for start and finish dates. Members will be either over or underburdened, and the project may be missing tasks. The project manager then needs to modify the schedule to account for these issues before starting the project. Furthermore, projects rarely go exactly to plan. Unexpected events can cause delays, rework, that will require corrective action to resolve. This can be done by shortening the task duration estimates, creating additional tasks, delaying tasks to accommodate for limited resources, fixing incorrect dependencies, or accelerating tasks. All of these actions have an effect on the overall schedule, but the project manager has no way to predict the cumulative effect of these changes on the schedule, or whether or not the corrective action will indeed resolve a time-based issue. 3D Experience has brought in a new system for exactly this problem, in the form of experiments. This is a duplicate of the original schedule that can be modified with the proposed solutions to determine their overall effect without editing the actual project schedule until a suitable solution is found. Firstly, you need to make sure the settings for experiments are correctly defined. Most importantly, change the Enable Approval option to True. Experiments are initially duplicates of their existing schedule. It is advisable to create a new experiment for each proposed change, as this will later allow the project manager to see the individual effect of each change and then select only the most advantageous changes or to decide which may be the best option between alternatives. Experiments behave exactly the same as schedules and can be modified in the same way. Please note the different icon between experiments and schedules. You can modify the project schedule from this page, so be sure you are working in the correct object from now on. Experiments will be used when problems have been identified within the project. These need to be properly tracked, and so the Issues function is used to seek approval for the changes and to notify important people of the change. The first step is creating the issue. We will now go over to 3D Experience and demonstrate these first steps. When dealing with experiments, the first thing to check is that the project settings are correctly defined. We do this from the project space by going to the Details category, Preferences tab, clicking on Edit Details, and changing the Enable Approval option from False to True. Then say Done, and return to the schedule. Thus far in the demo, we've been dealing with the Schedules category. For experiments, we will instead go to the Experiment section. The Experiments category now gives us 3 windows. The first is Project Changes that we will deal with later on when creating issues. The Experiments tab, which lists the schedule along with any related experiments. And the Lower Channel, which details the tasks and phases of the item we're investigating. To create a new experiment, first select the Demo Chassis project on the Experiments window and click Create. Our new experiment now appears as a child of the Demo Chassis 1 project. Again, please take note of the different icons for a project schedule and an experiment. We are able to modify the overall schedule from this section, so please make sure you select the experiment. To begin altering the experiment, click on it, and the lower channel will display the task structured view of the experiment. Having just been created, the experiment is an exact duplicate of the original schedule. This lower channel behaves exactly the same way as the schedule category structured view and has all the same commands. Thus, the experiment can be modified in the same way as the schedule was in the previous video. For our case study, we will create 2 experiments. The first will be to reduce the manufacturing time from 10 to 5 days by splitting the work between 2 suppliers. But to do this, we will need to include a 2-day delivery time from the second manufacturer. And the second will be to reduce the main chassis modeling time from 5 days to 4. For the first experiment, we must now add in 2 additional tasks under the chassis detail design phase. These two tasks will now appear later on in our list. Seen here, manufacturing by supplier A and manufacturing by supplier B. The initial chassis manufacturing task is now redundant, so we will delete this one and move manufacturer supplier A and supplier B up the list for consistency. If we now change over from the structured view to the Gantt chart, we can see that we are missing several dependencies, as the task related to these dependencies has since been deleted. So we need to remake them. As done before, we can use the drag and drop approach. But we are not yet finished. We must now include the 2-day delay coming from supplier B. We can do this by double-clicking on the dependency line and increasing the lag from 0 to 2 days. Once we've finished modifying the experiment, we must save it. And in the same manner, we will create our second experiment, going back to demo chassis 1 and create. We have now created our 2 experiments, but before we can modify the full schedule, we must gain approval for our proposed changes. To do this, we go to the Project Changes window and create an issue. In the description section, we now input our problem as well as our proposed solution. We then select an experiment approver. For this demo series, I would like all this information to come back to me, so we will select Oliver. We must also input an issue assignee, someone who will be responsible for dealing with this issue. Again, I will select myself. And we must also link our newly created experiment to the issue, so that whoever the experiment approver and assignee are, they can quickly identify our proposed solution. Splitting the work between 2 manufacturers was the first experiment we created and comes up as experiment 109. We can then input further information, such as estimated start dates and finish dates, priorities, policies, and problem types, if necessary. For now, we'll simply move on. Our newly created issue now appears under the Project Changes window. We will create a second issue for our second experiment in the same way. Having created our experiments and logged our problems using the Issues functionality, we will now go back to our presentation to detail the section on comparing experiments. Once the issue is created, a different project member will be notified and requested to approve or reject the changes. Using the compare function, you can quickly identify the changes in even very large projects. The icons on the left side of the task names indicate which have been modified, added, and removed. Approving a solution is accessed through the Collaboration and Approvals app, and any involved members will receive email notifications of the approval of the issue solution. The issue must then be closed once a solution has been decided upon. Having approved the changes to the project via the experiments, we must now carry the approved changes over to the actual project. This is done with the Syncing Right option. Now for a quick demonstration. When the issues are created, the project members assigned as approver and assignee will need to navigate to the issue and then onto the experiment comparisons. The Collaboration and Approvals app, detailed later in the series, will display the approvals task on their home page, but a faster way is to click on the Pending Issues button that appears next to the project space title in the top left-hand corner. Click on one of the issues to open up its details. And note that this will automatically open up the Collaboration and Approvals app. Approval for items, changes, and experiments is done with the use of routes. So go to the routes category, open the related route, and click on the Content tab. This will display the issue and the attached experiment. We will deal with routes in more detail during the collaboration and approvals demo. But for now, clicking on the experiment will open the experiment space and bring up the comparisons window. This window highlights the differences between the experiment and the existing schedule. We can work from here to determine the merit of the experiment, but only for this experiment. Personally, I prefer to work from the Project Management Experiments category as it provides better functionality and allows me to decide on the best option between alternative experiments as well as the current schedule. So we will go back to Project Management, Projects, Demo Chassis 1, and Experiments. Having checked the issue details, I know which experiment relates to each issue. Select the schedule and the first experiment, and then click on the Compare button. The lower channel is then split into two halves, with each side showing one of those selected schedules or experiments. In this instance, our experiment appears on the left-hand side and our original schedule on the right. 3D Experience will highlight the task cells that are different between the two selected items. For example, the chassis detailed design phase has a duration of 39 days in our existing schedule. But shifting over to our experiment, this same phase now has a duration of 36. This shorter duration has a knock-on effect to the final review phase in that its starting and finishing dates in the original schedule was the 15th and 17th of April, but is now the 10th and 14th in our new experiment. Currently, we can only see the phases, so if we click on Expand All, we can now see the full list of tasks. Scrolling down, we can reach the section where most of our changes occurred. The far left-hand column shows us the modification icons. These icons point out tasks that were either added, such as manufacturing supplier A and B, tasks that were removed, such as our original chassis manufacturing, and tasks that were modified, such as chassis testing and safety validation reports. In more detail, the chassis testing had its predecessors changed. These are the relationships. It was originally linked to the chassis manufacturing task, which has since been removed, and its dependency has now been related to manufacturing by supplier A and by supplier B instead. Scrolling across in our experiment, we can see that the chassis testing start date is now the 2nd of April rather than the 7th in our original schedule. Our original modification gave a 3-day acceleration of this project, yet the start date is 5 days earlier. This will be due to a weekend falling somewhere in this original time frame. Referring back to our experiment, the accelerated start date now has a knock-on effect to all of the succeeding tasks in that these can be started earlier. This is further highlighted over here. We are currently dealing with a fairly small project, and so viewing all of the tasks in the project is still quite manageable. When dealing with a much larger project, we can click the Show Diff Only button so that 3D Experience only displays the tasks and phases that have been affected by our experiment. If necessary, we are able to compare two experiments in the same manner. To approve or reject our proposals, we go back to the Collaboration and Approvals app. Go to the Task section and select the issue item. From this page, we can now approve or reject our proposal. In this case, we'll approve it and state as much in our comments. And click Approve. Returning to Collaboration and Approvals, we will actually reject the second task. Select the Reject icon and provide comments as necessary. We can now close Collaboration and Approvals and return to Project Management. Having approved or rejected the routes, we must now go back to the issue and mark these issues as closed. Our final step is now to merge the approved experiment with our existing schedule. We now go back to Project Management app, Project Space and Experiments category. Once again, compare the experiment with the schedule. Expand all. We must now select all of the modified items, such as chassis detailed design phase, and all subsequent modified items. Then click the Sync Right option and save. We now refresh the page and return to our schedule. And we can now see that all of our changes made in the experiment now reflect in the overall schedule. That will complete our section on experiments. We can now return to our presentation and finish off. By this point, we have created the project schedule, used experiments to test issue resolutions, and synchronized the main schedule with the accepted experiment modifications. But we have no clear way of identifying when and how the project was updated over its life cycle, or the status of the project at certain points. This takes us onto baselines, which will be detailed in the next video.